This is the T-80, a Russian-designed and manufactured main battle tank based off the T-64. It's a lethal weapon when manufactured correctly, so why did Russia discontinue development of the T-80 and now focus solely on the T-90 instead? It has to do with a mix of practical performance and politics. Let's start with the exterior and some of its features. Practically speaking, the T-80 was an offspring of the T-64, and while having numerous noticeable upgrades in terms of armor and electronics from its parents, the downfall had more to do with politics than any practical limitations. It also meant that it inherited the entirety of the T-64's flaws. One of the bigger issues, at least in the eyes of designers and leaders alike, was in the fact that two of the major autoloader designs for MTBs in the USSR, the T-80 was fitted with the older MZ design as opposed to the newer AZ design that had been introduced with the T-72. AZ's main goal was to correct issues with MZ, along which included a lack of crew, interior mobility, the fire hazard that a hydraulic-powered system presented, lack of case stub ejection, fume accumulation, and a plethora of other issues. It also didn't help that the T-70 development in armor was by the 1980s slower than the T-72 armor. By 1985, the T-72 was very much tending towards having the better armored hull, and if nothing else, its turret armor scheme had upgraded potential, something the latest T-80U armor schemes lack. Now onto the politics. The T-72 and the T-90 were both projects belonging to the ULGD, and have always been located firmly in Russia, as has their main factory. Now comes the complicated part. The T-64 was originally designed by the KMDB, who worked with the KHPZ factory, which is in Ukraine. The T-80 was essentially a collaborative project between them and the KBTM, who are based in St. Petersburg, Russia. Both worked on the design. Production was thus split mainly between the St. Petersburg plant and the Kharkiv plant, which, as far as has been noted, KMDB generally got first dibs on updating their machinery whenever a new variant was devised, while KBTM stuck to the old spec for a while to ensure spare parts were available. Now, there was at one point plans to replace the T-64, T-72 and T-80 in USSR service, and to use the T-90 as an interim and export tank, with KMDB supplying prototypes for a next-gen service tank. But with the breakup of the USSR, led to the end of that hypothetical. No more Kremlin wallet for the KMDB, and Ukraine is now its own country. Which also brings up why Russia isn't too keen to keep working on the T-80 themselves. The T-80 factories in Russia weren't yet updated to the later models, namely the T-80U being mostly focused on supplying spare parts for the T-80 BVM. Ukraine got the factory with all the T-80 production capacity, which is a real shame for Russia. Of course, Russia also walked out with the T-90 project in hand, so practically speaking, there really wasn't a reason to care too much, certainly not enough to try and update their T-80 production infrastructure.